Hi, my name is Jocelyn Luzardo, and I'm going to talk about embracing oral cholera vaccine, the short-term response to cholera. Definition. Cholera is a bacterial infection of the small intestine that causes watery diarrhea. It is caused by the bacterium Vibrio cholerae. This bacteria secrete a toxin that causes an increase in the amount of water released by the cells that line the intestine. This increase in water causes severe diarrhea.
Cholera is an acute diarrheal disease, and it's transmitted by what's called the fecal-oral route, which means that water or food that is infected with the Vibrio cholerae, which is the bacteria that causes the disease, is then ingested or eaten or drunk by individuals, and that's how they get ill. Most cases, the people don't get very ill. They either don't really feel that they have any symptoms, or they'll have mild diarrhea. But in about 20 or 25% of those who do get diarrhea, it's very severe. They have severe diarrhea and often vomiting. The disease progresses very rapidly, so they can be fine in the morning and be very, very ill by the end of the day. For most cases, the only treatment that will be necessary is oral rehydration solutions. So it's a standard package that is diluted into clean water, and that's enough. But for those patients that I mentioned who are severely dehydrated, they will need intravenous rehydration followed by oral rehydration, and they usually also get antibiotics. The best way to prevent cholera is for everybody to have access to clean water, clean drinking water, to have good sanitation, so you've got good excreta disposal. But we know that in these emergencies, that's very difficult to have. So although we're always working on that and ensuring that people get rapid access to treatment, the vaccine gives us an additional tool to try and help protect especially at-risk populations. It's an oral vaccine, so it's very easy to administer. And it's given to all age groups, from age 1 to the most elderly of the population. It's a very safe vaccine. Millions of doses have been given and no major side effects have been reported. It's been used in many different countries now. You get some protection after the first dose, but you need the 2 doses to get full protection, and that's about 65% protection for up to 5 years.
Application in medicine. Most people exposed to the cholera bacterium, Vibrio cholerae, don't become ill and don't know the be between infected, but because they shed cholera bacteria in their stool for 7 and 40 days, they can still infect others through contaminated water. Most cases of cholera that cause symptoms cause mild or moderate diarrhea. That's often hard to tell apart from diarrhea caused by other problems, or develop more serious signs and symptoms of cholera, usually finding in few days of infection. Pros and cons. Pros. There are several oral cholera vaccines available. It's a monovalent single dose liver attenuated virus vaccine called Bacteria is available in the user for adults less 64 years of age. The efficacy bacteria beyond 3 and 6 months is unknown. For the control of cholera, the correct disposal of human excrement and the purification of water reset are needed. Cons. Approximately 75% of those infected are asymptomatic, but the pathogens are eliminated in their phase for 7 and 40 days, during which they can infect other people. Cholera is an extremely virulent disease that can affect both children and adults.
My dad was so tired. He had severe diarrhea and profuse vomiting. My mom was so worried about him, and so was I. I took my father to see a doctor. The doctor suspected that he had cholera.
Profuse vomiting, watery diarrhea and sunken eyes are typical symptoms of cholera. We have seen a number of cases of cholera in this area recently. Watery diarrhea and profuse vomiting result in severe dehydration and can lead to death if not treated promptly. So treatment should start immediately by taking oral rehydration salts to compensate for the rapid loss of bodily fluids and minerals. If your father is severely dehydrated, he'll need to go to the hospital to be given intravenous fluids. We need to take a stool culture to see if it is cholera. There's no need to worry. Cholera can be easily treated, but only when one seeks medical care quickly, as you did. Cholera is not an airborne disease. It cannot be transmitted through coughing or sneezing. The bacteria that causes cholera is found in the feces of infected people, and infection may be spread through flies contaminated with a patient's feces or leakage from sewage contaminated with the bacteria that infiltrates drinking water or contaminates food.
After learning about cholera and how it spreads, I decided to educate others about the disease and support them in their fight against cholera. My friends and I started a group in our neighborhood to raise awareness of the disease and the ways to prevent cholera. Each of us has started by making sure that we have clean drinking water at home. We now boil water for 2 to 3 minutes before drinking it. Or we add water purification tablets to the water. These can be picked up free of charge from all health centers. Make sure to wash your hands with soap and clean water. Wash all fruits and vegetables properly with safe, clean water before eating them, and peel them whenever possible. Serve and eat cooked food while hot, and keep food covered to protect it from flies. We made home visits to tell people how to prevent cholera through hygiene habits, such as washing hands properly, especially after changing a baby's diapers, or while nursing a patient with symptoms of cholera. Keep cooked food separate from raw food, and don't drink unpasteurized milk. We intensified our efforts to make children aware of the importance of following simple precautions to avoid cholera, such as washing hands properly before eating and after using the bathroom. My friends and I are playing our part in the fight against cholera. You can fight cholera too.
Issue applied in Ecuador. The first case of cholera was reported in Ecuador on February 28, 1991, a few weeks after Peru declared a cholera epidemic. It has been reported that Ecuador fishermen traveled to Peru and was exposed to cholera. In the first epidemiological week, cases were reported in the widespread region of the country, like Esmeraldas in the north, Guayas in the center of the coastal zone, and across the Andean highland. Waiting moved the epidemic had reached beyond the Andean mountains to Amazon River, and spring throughout the rainforest. At the peak of the epidemic, the 66 epidemiological, with more than 3,000 new cases were reported in the country.
According to numerous accounts, cholera has existed in India since antiquity and originated in the warm and brackish water of the Bay of Bengal. At the turn of the 16th century, a Portuguese officer returning from the Indies brought back a chronicle of his travels, and fear of a terrible scourge engulfed the old continent. In 1817, the first cholera pandemic marked the beginning of a new era. From India, where it originated, the disease followed trade routes to reach all four corners of the globe. Arriving in London in 1832, in the middle of the Industrial Revolution, 7,000 people died of cholera. That same year, it was the turn of New York, and, at the peak of the epidemic, 100 people a day were dying of the disease. The seventh pandemic began in South Asia in 1961, hit Africa in 1971, then South America in 1991, before moving on to its latest victims in Haiti in 2010. In 1831, Alexandre Moreau de Jonesse was alone in maintaining that the disease was caused by a germ. In 1849, John Snow, a physician and the founder of modern-day epidemiology, suspected that it was spread via water distribution networks. 3 years later, London decided as a precautionary measure that the city's water would be filtered through sand before being distributed, a method that still proves effective today. In the second half of the 19th century, many scholars of all nationalities examined Vibrio cholerae, a comma-shaped bacteria which causes the disease. In 1854, the Italian Filippo Pacini isolated the bacteria. 30 years later, Robert Koch, the German physician famous for discovering the tuberculosis bacteria, took all the credit for showing that the comma-shaped bacteria is indeed the cause of the disease. The first effective treatments were the work of Englishman Leonard Rogers, who developed an intravenous rehydration solution in India. The drop in mortality rates was spectacular. Meanwhile, in Marseille, chlorinating the water supply halted the spread of the epidemic. A century later, in the 1950s, biologists showed that the bacteria produced a toxin. This discovery led to the development of oral rehydration therapy, still the most commonly used today.
Conclusion. The cholera virus is transmitted through fecal matter. It is contracted by consumed food and drinking water contaminated by the fecal matter of an infected person. The vaccines are 66% to 85% safe and effective. After 2 doses, while infrared hair protection and immunity lasting up to 5 years.
If you've played the Oregon Trail, then you know cholera is a harrowing illness that killed many a pioneer. But what exactly is cholera, and why are people still getting it? Hey there, bankers from Boston and carpenters from Ohio. Trace here for D-News. While many of us only know it from the game Oregon Trail, cholera is a real infection with real consequences. In 2010, Haiti was hit with a massive earthquake. UN workers arrived to help, but possibly also brought cholera along with them. Haiti had not had a cholera outbreak in more than 50 years, but the 2010 outbreak left about 790,000 people sick and over 9,000 dead. We wanted to know, what exactly is this disease and what does it do? Cholera is a bacterial infection caused by Vibrio cholerae. Only about 1 in 10 people affected develop symptoms, but those that do must get treatment quickly and can experience excessive watery diarrhea, vomiting, and abdominal cramping. Cholera can kill a healthy individual within hours if they are not treated properly. According to Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, the incubation period for the disease is about 12 hours to 4.5 days. Cholera affects the digestive tract by releasing choleragen, or cholera toxin, a protein that attacks the gut, causing the watery diarrhea. Because those affected are losing so much fluid, it leaves them severely dehydrated. This can cause hypovolemic shock, or an extreme loss of the body's fluid. This loss of fluid literally makes the blood thicken, which causes problems with circulation and keeps it from reaching organs. This also happens during regular old dehydration and can lead to death if a patient isn't hydrated immediately. Because the loss of fluid is the major symptom, the primary treatment is fast and plentiful rehydration. In areas of the world where cholera outbreaks are common, doctors keep rehydration packets, IV fluids, and salts on hand. I know you're probably thinking salt makes you thirsty, but it's also an important part of life. Without salt, our body can't move fluids around easily. So these packets contain sodium for water movement and glucose, which was discovered to accelerate fluid movement by research published in The Lancet in 1978. They called it the most important medical advance of the century. There are also antibiotics for cholera. However, rapid rehydration is the most important step in saving lives. Today we know that cholera is often transmitted through fecally contaminated water and food, but back in the early 19th century, physicians thought it was caused by bad odors or miasmas rising up from the sewers and open graves. A British physician by the name of John Snow, no, not that John Snow, this guy actually knows something. Snow theorized that something else was responsible because the main symptoms were not in the lungs, but in the digestive tract. Instead of breathing in the source of cholera, Snow believed patients ingested it. During an outbreak in Soho, London in 1854, Snow mapped the cases of cholera and found that there was an epicenter to the outbreak. The Broad Street water pump was surrounded by the highest incidences of the disease, which led Snow to believe it was contaminated water that was the culprit. He published his findings in a book in 1855. It's actually a pretty fascinating read. Also in 1854, in Florence, Italy, Filippo Pacini published a paper describing the microorganism that caused the disease, and in 1884, Robert Koch isolated the bacteria and described how the cholera was spread. Since then, the disease has mostly been eradicated in developed countries with proper sanitation. Each year, cholera affects 1.3 to 4 million people and causes 21,000 to 143,000 deaths worldwide. There are several regions still affected around the world, including India, much of Africa, and most recently, Haiti. After much investigation into the 2010 Haitian earthquake response, it's thought that some Nepalese UN workers may have had cholera in their systems, since Nepal was dealing with an outbreak of their own. Because the septic tanks the UN workers used emptied into a landfill that was close to a river which was used for drinking and bathing, they spread that cholera to the local population. In August 2016, the UN admitted that they played a part in the outbreak and they're planning to help with financial support. Are you on Snapchat? Because so are we. We've got some really cool stories about science and so much more every week on Seeker. Do us a favor, open up your Snapchat app, pause the video, and scan this code. We'll be looking for your ideas in the messages. See you all there. Are you interested in other diseases like, for example, leprosy? Check out this video about what leprosy does to your body. Have you ever been to a nation stricken with cholera? What precautions did you take? Let us know down in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you get more D News.